So we're doing, Aaron, I'll let you start.
Okay, hi everyone. First of all, just apologies for updating the source sheet late. It's the same, for the most part, the same sources I sent out last week. I just included the RON that Joel sent out, and then I added a couple more sources that we probably won't look at, but that I thought were interesting or relevant or important. So maybe before we jump into the sources, and I'll share my screen. In the first two theme, were there particular topics either that people were confused by, interested in, curious about, particular questions people had, just so we can think about how to spend our time best? If not, I have a plan for how to spend our time. Okay. If you change your mind, let me know. Okay, can everyone see? You cannot see.
So far, just now we can.
There, now we can see.
Okay.
Just as by way of introduction, we're in Siman 102, and the topic is Devar SheYesh Matirin.
Yes. I won't be able to necessarily see you on my screen, so if you want to say something, just use the raise hand function or just speak. Okay, does someone just want to run through the Torah quickly? And just so you know how I laid this out, rather than going through the Torah and the Nosei Kelim and the Shulchan Aruch and Nosei Kelim, I broke it up by topic. Some of it influenced by how the Shirat Hayam broke up the topics, but otherwise just influenced by what I thought some of the important questions were, and what seemed to be the most relevant stuff. Okay, someone read the Torah?
Who's Shirat Hayam?
I don't remember who Shirat Hayam is. He was the head rabbi, I believe, of Gush Katif. He has just a helpful
a contemporary. In other words.
contemporary. He has like a helpful summary book of Hilchot Kashrut. And he has some good. I find he has good topic headings.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Anyone want to read the Torah?
I guess I can.
Go for it, Jacob.
Kol Devar SheYesh lo Matirin kagom Beitza Senolda B'Yom Tov Zeruya Lemechar Im Nitar V'Bachrut B'Bachrut Ben Slema Ben Trufa Ena Batla Afilu B'Alef V'Afilu Safek Im Nolda B'Yom Tov Im Lav Nitar V'Bachrut Asirot V'Afilu Asami Manatavshil Rafael Sami Manatavshil. So anything that
finish, just finish that sentence. It goes up until Shehu Asor.
Katab Avi has Rishahu Asor. Okay. Yeah. So anything that has permissible thing in it, or it can become permitted. So
Can become permitted.
Yeah. An egg that was laid on Yom Tov, that it'll be fine the next day. If it mixed with others, whether they were like complete, whether it was complete, whether it was treif.
Not treif here, I believe, like cracked or broken.
Oh, okay, that makes a lot of sense.
Scrambled.
Oh,
Beitzat trufa is a scrambled egg.
Okay. It's you can't invalidate it even in 1,000. And even if there's a doubt if it was born on Yom Tov or not, and it was mixed with others, it's forbidden. And even if you cook something with it, Aviazri writes that it's forbidden. Abalafi Masha Parish forbidden Tam Dehad Devar SheYesh lo Matirin Eno Batel Dafka Kishnitara B'Mino. Aval Nitara She'eno Mino Taimo Batel B'Shishim. Im kain hatavsil mutar im yisposishit im kaven so kiven levatla.
Great.
Um,
Yeah, go ahead.
That according to what Rabbeinu Tom explained, that Devar Matirin is in Batel, that's specifically when it's mixed with things of the same type. But if it's mixed with she'enomino, things of a different type, the flavor can be Batel B'Shishim. So if so, if it's cooked, that's permitted if there's 60 to invalidate the flavor imparted by it, since he didn't intend to mevatel it with the cooking.
Great. Okay, and can someone just read the Shulchan Aruch? And maybe we won't translate it, but we'll just see what any relevant differences between the Shulchan Aruch and the Torah, including the Ramah. Does someone want to read the Shulchan Aruch?
I can read.
Great.
כל דבר שיש למתירין, כגון ביצה שנולדה ביום טוב, שראויה למחר, אם נתערבה באחרות, בין שלמות בין שלמה בין תרופה, אינה בטלה אפילו באלף. ואפילו ספק אם נולדה ביום טוב ונתערבה באחרות אסורות. ואם נתערבה בשאינה מינה, בטלה בשישי.
You can skip the parentheses.
Okay, here's the Ramah. מיהו אם לבנו במאכל או ניתנו בקטרה לתקן את הקטרה, כגון שמלואה בתרנגולת, אינה בטלה. And then citations.
Differences between the Torah and the Shulchan Aruch.
So one is that the Torah explicitly says ve'afilu asami menu tavshil in the name, right? And the Shulchan Aruch doesn't have that. The Ramah sort of adds that, but not really.
Right. So the Torah has both positions. He has Avi Ezri's position that the tavshil is asur, and Rabbeinu Tam's position that the tavshil is mutar. The Shulchan Aruch does not seem to rule on it here, though he actually does rule on it elsewhere. And the Ramah sides with, or appears to side with Avi Ezri, or at least against Rabbeinu Tam.
Yeah.
Any other relevant differences?
Wait, I would have said that the Shulchan Aruch is. I thought the Tavshil was in the Shulchan Aruch's language, nitarva be'she'ena mina. That's how I understood it, but maybe not.
Sorry, yes, the Tav. I should have said not the Tavshil. The Shulchan Aruch does rule on the libun, or the tikkun. Which I can.
Right. I mean, those are also just kind of expanding on stuff that we didn't see explicitly laid out in the Torah, that like the idea is even Rabbeinu Tam would be modeh in those cases, because it's not just about flavor, it's about like a certain significance they have if they're like performing this kind of essential function in the tavshil.
So there's a question as to which way the Torah would rule on this. I believe the Derech Moshe, which is the Ramah, actually thinks the Torah rules that libun and tikkun are not a problem. I have that source somewhere in the source sheet. We can take a look at it. Okay, so those, for the most part, fairly similar rulings. Some questions about, right, me and b'she'eino in terms of specific things, tavshil, libun, tikkun, but otherwise fairly consistent. So just first to think about what's the purpose of this halacha in the first place. We're not going to look at the Gemara inside, but we're just going to look at the second comment of Rashi's right here. Someone wants to read? Anyone? Alish.
So just Rashi, right?
Just Rashi.
Okay. שיש לו מתירין שיכול
So-
לאוכלו
This second Rashi. Afilu ba'alef. Ba'alef labat.
ואף על גב דמדאורייתא חד בתרי בטיל, דכתיב אחרי רבים להטות, אחמור רבנן, הואיל ויש לו מתירין לאחר זמן, לא יאכלנו באיסור על ידי ביטול. So אפילו בערב לא בטל, so even in the because the oraita it would be batel berov because it's written אחרי רבים להטות, so rabbis are more stringent because after some time it can be permitted, so he will not, somebody will not eat it while it's forbidden through bitul.
Or there is no way to eat it through bitul while it's in its state of Isser. In terms of understanding what Rashi is saying here, I think there's maybe a formal way of understanding this and sort of like a practical way of understanding. How does Rashi understand the purpose behind this prohibition?
I mean, I would say that like the lo yachlenu is not that there is no way, but that like we shouldn't, and so they make it forbidden, right? That like it's the non-formal way of saying it is like, look, bitul is about like not suffering massive losses when people aren't like, generally people who are like not Russias care about the halacha, things happen, and it's like ways of not losing massive amounts of food, right? But the whole idea of the Devar SheYesh Matirin is that you will in fact be able to eat this in many cases like very soon and without tirchat, and we see that like going into the definition of it itself. So like something that you, without relying on this this principle of bitul, you could eat anyway in like a day or a week or whatever. Like, yeah, it's a bit, you don't really, the kind of logic behind having bitul in the first place is no longer so essential.
Great. So we don't really need bitul in this case because it's going to be fine anyway, or maybe we don't like doing bitul and we only want to allow for bitul and we have to, and here we would actually be fine eventually without bitul. Any other ways of understanding what Rashi is saying and what's motivating this halacha?
I want to ask you, in terms of how you're saying that, Aaron, so you're saying bitul is kind of is actually just a b'diavad kind of act. I mean, or how would you frame it in terms of status? Or we had bitul, I'm not sure if that's the term, but you had something, you had a chazaka that you have a chazaka that it has this forbidden substance, and bitul comes and changes the chazaka. I just wanted more explanation from you on this. It would be helpful to me in understanding this.
I like what Lexi said, right? That b'diavad, we don't want this person to have a massive hefsed because they made a mistake, and perhaps an honest mistake that is, we can imagine easily someone making. So bitul is our way of saying this doesn't really matter, or this isn't really the thing we're worried about. If you're eating 1/60th of a thing or less than a 60th of a thing, like that's not the thing that we really don't want you to do. And I think the flip side might be when we say there's no bitul, we're either saying there's no real reason to do bitul here, right? We don't need to get you off the hook because you're going to get off the hook anyway. Or you might be saying when there's no bitul, that means like we think you really should have been careful about this. You know, that muktzah egg, you should never have had that muktzah egg anywhere near your non-muktzah eggs. So we're not going to let you have bitul.
Bitul is getting off the hook.
Yeah. Maybe. Or bitul is saying like this thing.
Should you be more careful?
Wait,
should you be? I don't understand what you're saying. Are you saying that you should be more careful with a muktzah egg than with a treifa egg? Because a treifa egg we would allow it to be about that, but a muktzah egg we wouldn't. So you're saying it's because we're punishing you for being careless with a muktzah egg in particular?
It's not that you're supposed to be more careful. It's that like we give this leniency despite your carelessness with the other cases, because otherwise you'll suffer a significant loss. Whereas here, where you wouldn't suffer a significant loss for your carelessness, it feels kind of like excessively lenient to say you can actually just eat it now when A, you should have been a little more careful, and B, you'll be able to eat it tomorrow.
Well, I don't understand. Is bittul something that the Rabbanim create as a whim? Like when they feel like it, they have bittul, and when they don't feel like it, they don't?
I'll open that up to everyone else.
Or is bittul a law of the Torah?
I mean, I think you could probably say it's both, right? It could be a law of the Torah, and the rabbis are deciding when does bittul apply, or at least when would bittul potentially normally apply, right? Bittul barov is doraita, should apply min b'mino in general, but we're actually going to take that away from you because we want to make sure X, Y, Z. I mean, we know that the rabbis apply it.
Bittul, bittul
But I'm
not
saying
a statement of fact, maybe the way Reb Nachum alludes to, but bittul is a kula, and therefore we're afraid of too many, no need for this kula because it's going to take place anyway. In other words, I'm not going in the direction of Lexi right now. I'm just saying it's we're worried about religious behavior as opposed to law. So we're afraid that bittul is a very effective way. We're going to put them. I'll say a little bit better. Bittul is very effective, but bittul, there being very effective, it's very dangerous because then you end up being mevatel anything on a whim. Now I'm using Nachum's term, on a whim, and therefore we want to control religious behavior.
I mean, I don't think it's a kula of the rabbis. Like it is a Torah, like it is a principle that we see, at least to some extent, coming, like, or at least being understood as coming from the Torah. I just think that like the whole conversation, like all of this or beheter, all we're talking about is b'diavad stuff, right? It's all dealing with like what we think is a non-ideal situation, right? That like bittul isn't something that we like. We've made that very clear. It's a thing that sometimes happens, right? But like ultimately, the whole reason we have to get so into this is because there's something that feels instinctively uncomfortable about consuming something that has any presence of Isser in it. And like, when we can make that insignificant enough, and when not considering it insignificant would involve significant loss, then we can rely on that. Whereas like, given that kind of inherent b'diavadness of it and the discomfort, when you could just easily not have to rely on that and just have something that is completely uncomplicatedly permissive, they're like, just do that.
Right. I don't think it has anything to do with your carelessness. I think it has to do with the fact that it's kind of like we're being machmir. We're saying, and I find this Rashi very shocking because he's saying lo yochlenu be'isser. Well, what isser? If it's batel, it's from the Torah. There's no isser here at all. There's no isser. What do you mean lo yochlenu be'isser al yedei bittul? Mapitom. It's not an isser anymore. It's batel. And according to the Torah, it's not isser.
Because it refers to the original state,
No, but it's already fell into this mixture, and according to the Torah, it's batel. I understand linguistically that he's calling it an isser because it was an isser before, but it's not an isser now. Lo yochlenu, but he's saying it is in an isser state. Lo yochlenu bit isser.
We don't right
in
now.
An isser state right now, even though. So it's kind of like saying it's kind of like a person who has a kitchen and some milk fell into his pot, and the person says, and the rabbi says it's batel, and the person says, well, I'm not going to eat it anyway, because I don't want to eat this thing that even has a hint of isser to it.
No, what he's saying is
we're talking about human action.
You're eating batel.
Action here that's taking place. The human action.
Now batel as opposed to just eating heter.
Again, the Torah, what's heter is whatever the Torah says is heter. And what's isser is whatever the Torah says is isser. And if the Torah says in a case of bittul that it's heter, then it's heter. That piece of pig that fell in there, is actually mutter now, is 100% kosher. Because it's batel.
I mean, I think that might be begging the question here over what is the Torah understand bittul in a formal sense, or is it saying like you can eat this thing, there's an isser in it, it's mutar to eat the isser? Well,
this din is a rabbinic din. That's what Rashi says. Afal gav di midoraita chad b'trei batel. In other words, according to the Torah says this is batel. The Torah has no problem with this, none whatsoever. it's the rabbis who have a problem with it.
Yeah, I also think, I mean, it's possible that Rashi's like not so medactic here when he says lo yachlanu be'isser. It's sort of like lo yachlanu, and we're gonna maintain it as an isser. So that lo yachlanu. But Sarah.
Yeah, along those lines, I just wonder if it's possible to read it as lo yachlanu isser be'isur brackets dirabanan al yadei bitul, right? Like that it's asur. The isser isn't. It's only right. We've agreed it's mutar de'oraita or asur de'oraita, but that like it's batel de'oraita. But there's a rabbinic stringency that says it still counts as isur on some
exactly,
level.
and the rabbis are saying that there's a conception of it. We have seen that it has.
Oh, these mean rabbis! I don't like this mean rabbi.
We have seen that isser, even though there's bittul,
Choser
isser
v'niur.
hangs around.
Choser
What?
v'niur.
Exactly,
Enough
choser v'niur. We have a din of choser v'niur. In other words, even though it's batel, it's actually still called an isser because it can be choser v'niur. So there is this.
This is good. The Easter, therefore, what you're saying, Reb Nachum, is and I should get out of the let Aaron give the share, but
So should
right, we should all get out. But if you allow me, Aaron, but what Nachum says is, Beetle is not always Beetle. Okay. In other words, Be'isur, right, that first stage, even though it's mutter, it's gone. You know what it's like? It's like if you stay for the credits during the horror movie, the man climbs out of the crypt. The monster climbs out of the crypt in order to do more damage. He's in the crypt. It should be gone, should be dead. But during the credits, the monster still lives.
In other words, right.
Easter here still is. Okay, I'll leave it alone now. I'm sorry. Thank you, Eric.
I think that's a good way of describing it. Just to keep moving here, maybe we won't read the Ron inside, but I know I didn't assign this Ron originally, but I did assign the Taz where the Taz paraphrases the Ron. Does someone want to just quickly say how the Ron understands the reason Devar SheYesh Matirin doesn't have Bitul? Yavni.
As I recall, it's that we don't because it is not fully isur, we don't consider it to be a min b'she'eno mino. No, something like that. I'm getting confused. Yeah, because it's
similar. It's that with the Rabbanan are Cholak and Rabbi Yehuda, who says min b'ino has no bitul. According to the Ran, he says that because he thinks these two things are mostly similar, right? They're the same thing. And the rabbis say they're mostly different because one's Isser and one's Heter. In this case, where one thing is Heter and one thing is almost Heter, the rabbis are Moda to Rabbi Yehuda that these two things are basically the same, and therefore there's no bittul. As I think Joel said, it's fairly elegant proof. It seems less intuitive than Rashi, but quite interesting.
Well, I think it's mostly
is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion
why it's only Eno Mevatel B'mino, right? Which Rashi, I think, doesn't disagree on ultimately. The Ran's just dealing with that difficulty.
Does Rabbi Yehuda hold his opinion? Is Rabbi Yehuda's opinion that it's never batel that didn't do right or Rabbanan? Based on this Ran.
Seems like Doraita.
But then if the rabbis are moda to him, then is it Devar SheYesh lo Matirin Doraita or Rabbanan?
It says, well, he says the rabbis are moda, or at least they're not to Rabbanan mishum chumra. So it's not exactly that they're moda; it's that they're going to be machmir. But as you're pointing out, right, that if you're being machmir because that sort of implies you think there's potentially a sefek issue doraita. But this whole thing has been framed as an issue of being an Esed Rabbanan. That's a good point. I didn't see anyone address that, but I'm sure somebody does.
Just to be clear, the whole idea is that it seems like there's a machloket between Rabbanan and Rabbi Yehuda whether or not min b'mino can be batel, but the Ran says that no, like the whole disagreement is actually they agree that min b'mino, they agree that min b'mino is never batel. They just think that if this is isur and this is heter, then it's not considered min b'mino. It's considered a different mean.
Yeah.
I think yes. I mean, the rabbis still have a sense of something is possibly being min b'mino. They just mean something different by it. Or that there are two axes of min b'mino.
Another way of putting it is there has to be something different. There has to be a contradiction in order for there to be bittul. In other words, there has to be soldiers of the enemy and soldiers of the good of our side, and then there can be bittul. There has to be there has to be differences. If everything is exactly the same, it's heter and min b'mino, then there's no such thing as bittul because there's no differentiation. There can only be bittul when there's differentiation.
But if
you might say that for the rabbis, oh, sorry, go ahead, Yami.
But if one being isur and one being heter is enough of a difference for it to be min b'she'eno mino, then the whole min b'mino category becomes sort of useless. And it just seems like this Ran's logic would be sort of hard to maintain in other discussions. But I didn't try it.
I don't think he's saying that makes it min b'she'eno mino. I think the Ram might say that according to Rabbanan, there are three categories, right? There's min b'she'eno mino, as we understand, as we've been talking about it, min b'mino, as we've been talking about it, and this category that they think that Rabbi Yehuda has, the Rabbanan, right? That is like, it is the same mean, and they're both sort of heter. And that's
super min b'mino.
It works that it doesn't extend to other things, right? Because that's the whole point, is that in general, we don't see, like the rabbis, as you've been saying, in the ways we've generally been talking about min b'mino, the rabbis say it is batel, right? And so the point is that, like, actually what the rabbis would consider truly min b'mino only exists in this incredibly narrowly defined category. And outside of this, yeah, it's not applicable outside because, yes, they would say basically everything else is min b'she'eno mino, even the things we've classically been calling min b'mino, and that's why they think it's batelable.
Right. There's like min b'mino and super sand min b'mino. Okay. I don't want to read this whole Bach, but just on the question of when there's a safek as to whether something is Devar SheYesh Matirin and it's in a Tarovet. I think it would be good to read the first few lines. I'll pause whoever's reading when it's time to pause. Someone read? In fact, it's really just up till Ela b'vada or vada.
I will.
Great, thanks, Rafael.
No problem. So from the beginning?
Yeah.
מה שכוסב, אפילו בספק אם נולד ביום טוב, אם לא נתערבה באחרות, פירוש, סביר עלי לרבנו דניתר והספיקה נמי קאי, אף על גב דאיקה ספיקה, החמירו בדבר שיש לו מתירים. ומי הוא הרמב"ם בפרק א' מלכות, יום טוב כתב, לא כתב דניתערבה אסורה, אלא בוודאה. וכן פירש הרב המגיד. So basically,
okay, pause there,
yeah. What the Bach is saying is that the tool implies that even in a situation of sfeika that is classically supposed to be mutar, there is a chumra le'esor mitzad davar sheyesh lo matirim. We do paskin lechumra and oser in davar sheyesh lo matirim in beitzah safek im nolda b'yom tov, even though from the Rambam's lashon in mashma davka we need a vadai. The egg needs to be certain. We need to be certain that the egg is nolad b'yom tov, so we can put on it the category of davar sheyesh lo matirim. You went down.
I did go down, sorry. Right, so the Bach's opening position is that the Torah thinks this is Sfeika, right? One Safek is that this happened, the other is this is a tarovet, so any egg I take is not necessarily, is probably not the bad egg. The Tur says not okay, and the Rambam says that actually would be okay from Sfeik Sfeika. In the middle is a bunch of back and forth about who thinks what. Right? Some people, if this was an Isser Doraita, a Sefik Isser Doraita, it would be clear why Sfeik Sfeika would not work. Here, it's not so clear why Sfeik Sfeika doesn't work. And then there's a question as to whether this actually is a case of Sfeik Sfeika. But I just want to go down to where the where does he say what he thinks? Okay, we can just read from.
It's to the right of where your cursor is flashing. Oh,
great.
Sorry, I don't know. I thought that's what you were doing.
Yeah. I was just gonna let's read what he has as the Aguda.
והאגודה כתב בתרח היא באותו פרק, דספייק יום טוב ספייק חול נמי אין להתיר, מטעם ספייק ספיקה. דאין הספייק ספיקה מניין אחד. So he brings he says from in the name of the Aguda that we can basically there's this thing that you can only say sfeik sfeika if both sfeikot are in the same realm of sfeik. And here the sfeik of sfeik chol sfeik yom tov aren't there. It's not a it doesn't count to be an additional suffix that you can actually count on its behalf to be to take it off Devar sheyesh lo Matirin. לעניין ספק ספיקה מן אחד מכל מקום נראה דבהפסד מרובה אלא החמיר. א'
Inami.
Inami לכבוד Shabbos. Yeah, Inami לכבוד Shabbos. Yeah, it didn't seem right in the in the phrase. Inami לכבוד Shabbos ויום טוב ולעניות ולעני בדבר חשוב כי מדינה נראה כמו שכתבתי ולא כמו שכתב בשוע. בסתם לאיסור ובשני תערובות יש להתיר בדבר שיש לו מתירים לדברי הכל כדי משהו בדברי האגודה. So basically, should cover.
You can skip this Shnei Tarot part.
Yeah, so he basically is Efsed Merubah in a situation that someone doesn't have, or Linyan Onik Shabbos, if he will miss it, it doesn't, his Shabbat won't be the same, or his Yom Tov won't be the same. We should not go Lechumra here, even though there are lots of Svarot Lechumra, and that's Psak Shulchan Aruch, to go Lechumra even B'Sfeik Sfeika, Any Reledina can.
Great. And just for anyone unfamiliar with this issue of Sfeik Sfeika Minyan Echad, this would be the difference between I have an animal that's Safek Treifa, which is right one Safek, and it's in a Tarovet, that's a separate Safek, two different Sfeikot, versus I just shechted a bird and I see that its spine is broken. I'm not sure whether its spine broke before or after I shechted it. And even if its spine was broken before I shechted it, I'm not sure whether it would have punctured the lung and made it a treifa. So there are two doubts about the same issue. This is a broader topic that I imagine we'll get into it another time. But anyway, so the Bach says, I disagree with the Shulchan Aruch and the Tur. I don't think that this is I don't think that in a case of Safek Yom Tov, Safek Chol, that we have to be so machmir, but you can be machmir, but you should just be makel if there's a hefsed merubah. We're not going to look at both the shach and the taz, but let's look at the taz. Does someone want to read?
I mean, I can read again, I guess.
Go for it, Jacob.
So, just the Taz?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Vafilu Safek Kule. The Devar Zeh more Devar sheyesh lo Matirin, Mishar Devarim, She'enam Batelim, Dishem Mutar Besfeka. Disham Mutar Besfeka. Im Havadai Isor Hu Dirabanan. Amrinan suffix lo mutar kakol suffix durabanan. V'lo yazik lo imhu davar chashuv aval kan afilu b'suffix isar durabanan isar kevan sheyesh lo matirin. So with this thing, we're stringent since it will become permissible, and we're more stringent than with other things that wouldn't be invalidated, since something permissible is part of the doubt.
I think specifically in the case of other things that don't have bitul, like a birya and a paticha real lahit kabed, when the suffix about the isur is derabanan, we actually are makel on it. Here, we're not makel. Like in the case of a muktag or suffix muktag.
Yeah. Right. Okay. Yeah. Right. Okay.
But he
And
doesn't
then-
really.
Go ahead, Yavni.
Just that he doesn't really go into why. Give a reason why, does he?
He doesn't go into why. Any thoughts?
I mean, I think like Devar sheyesh lo matirin is fundamentally a different category than pretty much all the other not batelable things, right? Like all the other things that we talk about, it's generally they're not batal because they're like chashuv or significant in some kind of way. There's something that is like impossible to just kind of ignore and make irrelevant vis-a-vis how we relate to them. Whereas here, it's about what we were talking about extensively earlier, which is the idea of like, why are you relying on this bitul when you could just have it beheter, right? That like you just don't need to batel it. And it like, whereas with those other things, we're saying, no, we're actually kind of like a little more worried this bitul doesn't work in the same way or shouldn't because they're too significant. Here, it's like, you shouldn't be relying on bitul when you could just eat it permissibly.
Great. So I think there's Lexi's logic holds through. Both in terms of what is the sort of fundamental reasoning behind this, and then why are we so machmir in this particular case of a suffix? We're going to see, I mean, we've already discussed the way in which Devar sheyesh lo matirin also has a tzad kula from other things that don't have bitul, which is that you can have bitul b'she'eino mino. So we're going to look at let's look at the second shaf in Dalet, and then maybe we'll look at Gimel. Maybe I'll just call on people. Isaac, do you mind reading?
Sure. בשאינה מינה בטלה בשישים. אף על גב לעניין בריה וחתיכה הראויה להתכבד, אין חילוק בין נתערבה במינה או שלא במינה. וכדלאייל סימן בלה בלה ובהי הגבנה בהגה, sorry. שנה הכה דאין חשיבות מצד האיסור עצמו, אלא מאחר שיהיה לו היטל. אחר כך לא רצו חכמים להתבטל. This is exactly what Lexi just said. וכל שנתערב שלא במינו, אין ההיתר נקרא על הדבר האסור, אלא על שם דבר שנתערב בו, והווה כמי שאין לו מטילים. Okay, citation. Okay, so even so in the case of the birya or haticha haroya להתכבד, there's no difference between min b'mino or min she'eino mino, as we talked about above, and because but here it's different because there's no like importance, like this chashuv category doesn't apply in Devar sheyesh lo matirin to the item itself, right? Like in the because but rather because it's going to be permissible in the future, Chachamim didn't want to make it batel, and everything that's mixed with any sort of min b'she'eno mino, the heter is not because of like the
I think it's the
like
you don't
the
call the
Isser itself. It's because of the thing that's mixed into it, and then it becomes something like that's not going to be Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. In other words, like because you have the mixture, you no longer see it as like a Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. You see it as like this non-Devar SheYesh lo Matirin thing, and therefore you don't worry about the Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. This is like there was this whole thing in I think the Taz about like how you classify like mixtures of two things, that like a mixture of two things can take on like the definition of just one of the things, even though they are two different things. Like in the case of the dough, the water and the salt are considered to be the same thing, even though obviously water and salt are not min b'mino, because they're both considered things that like are necessary to make dough be dough.
Yeah, I think that's a related issue, a slightly different issue. That's when we do classify something as min b'mino because the substances have a particular relationship. Here, I think it's a question of when we have an Isser and a Heter, sort of what do we think of the Ta'arovet as, assuming that there's no particular relationship between the two and it's min b'she'eno mino. Just to zoom in here, what do you guys make of this? Just this right? Ein heter nikra devar asur, ela al shem devar shnitarev bo v'have k'mi she'ein lo matirin. We'll just focus on that for a second and how we would translate it or explain it. Yavni.
I was a little confused by the wording, but I thought what he was trying to say was like because like we have our egg that is temporarily asul, it's going to become mutar. But if we've made a cake out of it, there's never going to be a mutar egg again because there's no egg left. Now it's just a cake. And therefore, it's not considered a Devar SheYesh lo Matirin because it's gone. Maybe.
Any other interpretations? I'm not looking for something specific. That's also how I read it.
Aron, in terms of Devar SheYesh lo Matirin definition, are you finished with this now? Because I wanted to ask a question.
No, go for it.
Have we, maybe I missed in the conversation, have we talked about we focus on different elements. We focus on the element of Devar SheYesh lo Matirin as being a heter process already built into the system before any sort of notion of beetle takes place. In other words, it's kind of like the Isser self-destructs. There's a primacy to that process that's already part of what that whole part of halacha is, as opposed to beetle, which may or may not occur. In other words, I'm trying to look at the power of Devar SheYesh lo Matirin, the SheYesh lo Matirin primacy. It's already from an earlier stage, built in. It's already that self-destruct mechanism is there, and therefore we don't even consider any sort of other kind of problematic. I mean, way out heter.
I think we'll see that in Seif Bet, where according to the Rashba, it has to be something that will either definitely self-destruct or that we can certainly self-destruct. Though there is a slight debate between the Beretev and the citation of the Pitrei Tshuva about how much self-destruct does it need to have.
Okay.
I just want to also point out, apropos of what Lexi pointed out earlier, the difference between the Rashi and the Ran, where the Ran, within his explanation, explains why there's a difference, min b'mino and min b'she'eno mino. Most of the poskim here end up using Rashi's explanation, which means they then have to work to find an extra reason for min b'she'eno mino having bitul. And we really don't have time to go into it. What's interesting is we see both the Shach here and the Shach in the comment above, and a couple of other poskim, end up relying on sort of like social conventions is not exactly the right word, but again, the sort of like how things are named, what they're called, and we saw that right, the Ran has a fairly formal logic that makes sense. Rashi had a more practical logic, and the poskim who end up with Rashi's, who take Rashi's side in that debate, or just use Rashi for shorthand, end up with also a much less formal explanation of why min b'she'eno mino does a bitul. It's an interesting thing to look at. It's not so important for purposes of psak, I guess. Okay, just a couple of quick topics. We talked a little bit about Tavshil, Libun, and Tikkun. Just the Bach in terms of explaining why Tavshil is mentioned. He just points out you might think if this thing is totally destroyed, that it would then certainly have bitul. So that's why Abi Ezra is saying, no, even then it doesn't have bitul. Just want to read this passage in the Shulchan Aruch from Orach Chaim that's been cited a couple of times. Don't want to read? Sarah?
Sure. ביצה שנולדה ביום טוב שנתבשלה בשוגג עם בשר ותבשיל, אם יש 60 כנגדו, הכל מותר חוץ מן הביצה. אבל אם לבנו בו התבשיל וכיוצא בזה, מידי דלחזותה וטעמה אביד, לא באתו. So this seems to give some, okay, well, I'll just translate it. It's pretty short. Right, so if you take an egg that was laid on Yom Tov and you cook it bishogeg with meat and stuff, other things, if there's 60 against the egg, then everything is mutar except for the egg itself, except in a case where like you've cooked it at like a super high heat and then it's done like it's created time like through the whole thing. Then it's not.
I think the libun I think actually is like you're trying to change the color of the dish through the
I
eggs.
see. Yes. Okay, fine. You're trying to make it like so like look whiter.
Right. Also important that it's libnu, meaning you're using multiple eggs, meaning suggesting that actually if you have multiple eggs, you have a total of eggs, and only one of them is a Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. If you did libun, even in a tavshil, the whole thing is the answer.
Why do you say it's multiple eggs? It's not multiple eggs. It's multiple. If you did multiple libunim with it, libnu bo is single.
Why is it multiple libunim? It's they did
right.
libun with it.
Exactly. They did libun with it. But it's bo is it.
Yeah. There are other sources that do seem to read it as talking about a tarovet of eggs, that even in a tarovet of eggs, if you do libun and only one of them is Devar SheYesh lo Matirin, that might still be aser, which I think they get from this, but I don't actually remember.
But doesn't this halacha contradict what we just said? I mean, because we're saying that, why are we saying that the tavshil is mutter? We don't have. We should wait till after Yom Tov. Presumably, this is on Yom Tov.
I think the tavshil here is
because it's Eino Mino.
The implication is Eino Mino.
Gotcha.
And as Isaac mentioned earlier, there's a discussion about what exactly is, which you could see in the 8 minutes left.
So this is, even though it's Eino Mino, it's still going to be a problem. It's like another level of chumrah because it's well, this fits very nicely with what the Taz said, the Shach said, that because now you see it as like a whitened challah, as a shiny challah. In other words, you put the white of the egg, let's say, on the challah, and now it's bolet. It's not just the shame of it is still there.
Oh.
Maybe that's no.
Wait, is
Great,
is
yeah.
this particular for like a Devar SheYesh Lo Matirin, or is this a separate issue? Like if it were a treifa egg, would it also be asur with if it's libun?
It's a good question. Somebody who's studied Esther Beheter before should answer.
I think this does apply across the board, that it's considered to be like nikar enough and / significant enough, that it's like kind of similar to like the Devar HaMa'amid principle, right? That it's like performing an important enough function in the tavshil that it's not batel.
Okay. With our last 7 minutes, maybe we'll just, I think because it gets to Rav Landy's self-destruct point, we'll move on to Seif Bet. Someone want to read in the shulchan? I'll just ask somebody. Yavni.
יש מי שאומר שלא אמרו דבר שיש לו מתירין, אלא כשהמתיר עתיד לבוא על כל פנים, או אם המתיר בידו לעשותו בלא הפסד. אבל דבר שאינו בידו, ואינו ודאי שבא המתיר, אינו בדין דבר שיש לו מתירין. Should I translate?
Just summarize.
It only counts as davar sheyesh lo matirin if it'll happen, if it'll definitely happen like on itself or without any, or you can definitely do it without any loss, without any trouble. אבל דבר, לפיכך ביצה של ספק טרפה שנתערבה באחרות אינו בדין דבר שיש לו מתירין, לפי שאין המתיר בוודאי ואינו בידו. Therefore, if there's an egg that is like safek treifa, and so like in the future we'll see if the chicken turns out to be treifa, then it's not considered davar she'eino matirin because we don't have control over it, and yeah, and it's not definite.
Great. This we haven't really looked at any tangential sources, so maybe we'll end with a somewhat tangential source, but I think it is both interesting and also like gets at the question of what is a davar sheyesh lo matirin. Let's look at this Ber Heitev. Lexi, do you want to read?
Sure. So Safek, Ikshe Marar Moshe Luvov Lama Katav Machaber Lefi she'en hamatir bevadai Hadin Zed the Safek Treifa Lo Shayach Klal LeDavar sheyesh lo matirim Mishum degabe Beitza Shenoda B'Yom Tov Shapir Shayach Lomar Shi Davar sheyesh lo matirin Dachshav hu asor u'macharto yeh mutar. Ma she'en ken bebeitzat safek treifa, af hi meheter yeh biyado, u'sheyavo bevadai, mekom makom im nitarev ba'acherim, din hu sheyivatel mima nafshach. Im tiyeh tarnagolat treifa, im ken habeitza lo have davar sheyesh lo matirin, zaha be'emet treifa hi. V'ra'ui shetitbato, v'im tiyeh tarnagolat kshera, im ken lo ne'asar habeitza me'olam. Udavar sheyesh lo matirin lo shayach, mutar. Right, so
Yes, maybe, yeah.
Basically is distinguishing. He's like, there's a difference. Davar sheyesh lo matirin has to do with something that like is usher and will come to be mutar, not a thing that definitively like a safek treifa egg. Right now, it either is usher, and if it is usher now, it will stay usher. Or it is mutar, always has been, and will, like, as in it's a difference between something's state is changing versus our knowledge about the state is changing.
Great. And I think he's also just trying to understand, why did the Shulchan Aruch feel the need to add this thing in that seems intuitive? Obviously, based on what you just told me about the davar sheyesh lo matirin, I would know that a beitza treifa is not the davar sheyesh lo matirin.
So he says, "V'nirali l'taretz the machaber ayre kan מביצה של ספק טריפה שנולדה ביום טוב, גם כן, אם כן, אף שתהיה התרנגולת כשרה אחר כך, מכל מקום, הביצה אסורה היום שנולדה ביום טוב, וסלקדת החמינה, אם אותה הביצה נתערבה ביום טוב, לא תתבטל באלף, משום שיש לחוש שמתהיה התרנגולת כשרה, אם כן, אין לביצה זו שום איסור, רק שנולדה ביום טוב. כמשמען, הואיל שאין המתיר בוודאי עתיד לבוא, דשמא תהיה טריפה, אם כן, לא מקרא ביצה זו דבר שיש למתירין ובטלה. So basically, he's like, okay, I'm going to explain, I'm going to resolve the mechaber. Basically, he's coming to teach us this chiddush that if I have a beitza that both is nolda b'yom tov and it is a suffix treifa, I might have had the hava amina that because, like, if I find out in future that, like, the animal was a kshera, then this egg was in fact a davar sheyesh matirin because the only isser was the nolda b'yom tov. But kamash malan, that, like, since I don't know that right now, it's not bavadai that this will be permitted the next day because we might find out the animal is a treifa and then it's just aser. In this case, it can be batel.
Great. So we have to have 100% certainty that it will self-destruct. Interestingly, Pete Tshuva has cites a different position. This is part of a very, very long comment. I correctly assumed we would not have time to get to it. But Lexi, do you want to just read this quote from Pete Tshuva?
Sure. Ati davo kol panim. Ayin b'tshuva tzadi. I don't know what's tzadi. Do people know? Yeah. Siman samachtet b'beitzat treifa shnolda b'yom tov v'nitarva v'dan hashoel delo have davar sheyesh lematirin kevan de gam achar yom tov lo yeh heter belo bitul mikoach treifut. V'uzal cholek alav d'makom makom v'aday sheyeval yedei heter k'tzat d'achar yom tov yistalek isor hakolel zayinu nolad v'koma d'ashar l'me'avad b'heter avdina ayin sham. So basically, he thinks that since there is still a Isser that is on it now that will bavadai be undone, even though it's not a complete self-destruct, as it were, because we're not sure that this other Isser is going to prove to be false, it would still be applicable, right? That because that aspect of the Nolda B'Yom Tov will no longer be an issue the next day, it still counts.
Great. So just to summarize what Lexi said, and back to Rob Landy's question about self-destructing, the Ber Heitev seems quite clear that to be Devar Sheyesh Matirin, it has to be fully self-destructing definitively. For the Pischei Tshuva, at least the position of Tzadi, who I should have looked up, as long as it has a partial. Oh, it's Tzemach Tzedek. As long as it's a partial self-destruct, that is enough to make it Devar Sheyesh Matirin. Even if it might turn out to have been something unkosher, that would still be after. Which is interesting, right? That even right in this debate, this machloket achronim, we actually are going back to the original question of what is a Devar Sheyesh Matirin and sort of relitigating it through this particular unusual case of a Sefek Treifesh that actually has huge implications for how we understand the entire context of the thing we were talking about.
I also think his final comment here gets at sort of like the Rashi spar that we've been talking about, right? The kolma de efshar l'me'avad the heter of dinan, right? That, like, this might end up still being usher tomorrow. It's possible this, like, is a treifa, and so even when it's no longer a muktzah, it'll be an issue. But, like, it might not be. It might be a kshera, and it might be then that this is just, like, tomorrow a totally kosher egg. And if you can eat this in a way that is totally uncomplicatedly kosher tomorrow, even if we're not vadai that will come, we want to try.
Great point. Right, and that I think also just goes to show, right, this machloket, it's not even really it's a quasi machloket between Rashi and the Ran about what is actually going on here. Joel had posted a nafkamina from the Pri Megadim, but we see that there are actually, like, small nafkaminas sort of throughout. At the very least, in terms of how you justify what's happening, they may actually, in many cases, rule the same way. But we saw also on the question of bitul for Devar Shebein Amino that it does have implications for how we understand conceptually what is bitul here, what does it mean to be mevutal, why is there bitul, and how are we understanding the substances that are interacting. On that note, I guess we'll take a break and I'll pass it over to Rafael.
Thank you. Excellent. Great cheer.
So good evening, everybody. Continue after Alan. We're continuing the next two seifim of Siman Kuf Bet. Only to give a heads up, the interesting point that might be of significance about those two seifim, especially about the first seif Gimel, is that they don't actually exist in the tool. They're a paraphrasing of the tour in another place in Siman Kuf Kav Bet. And as I said, as I hinted, it might have some significance as we'll read along. So just a second. Yeah. So who didn't read today? Alesh, can you maybe read for us Siman Gimel? Siv Gimel?
I'm getting there. Okay. So it's tour.
No, it's Shulchan Aruch Kuf Bet Seif Gimel.
Okay. Good. There. I'm almost there. Let's saving. Okay. I'm there.
Where
I'm
you're
there.
looking,
Okay.
maybe
I'm
Sarah, would you take us there? Did you find it?
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
נאסר בבליעת איסור, right? כלי שנאסר בבליעת איסור שנתערב באחרים ואינו ניכר, בטל ברוב, ואין דנין אותו כדבר שיש לו מתירים. So, vessel which is forbidden by the Isur Barua, שנתערב באחרים, that was mixed with others, and then the kli was mixed with others, and we don't know which one it is, batel berov, so it's batel berov, and we don't say that it's davar sheyesh lo matirin.
And there's the Ramad there in the brackets.
Okay. לפי שצריך להוציא עליו הוצאות להגילו וכל כיוצא בזה. Because it's we would have to invest some money into the Hagala and similar things. So it would be kind of hefset. So that's why it's davar it's not davar sheyesh lo matirin.
Yeah, so it goes back a bit to Siman Bet to Seif Bet, sorry, as we saw that if there is need to be any type of hotza'ah, the Shulchan Aruch brings in the name of Rabbeinu Tam, it doesn't actually count as davar sheyesh lo matirim. And we'll expand a bit on what counts as an hotza'ah is I don't know, it is something quantitative that you need. It needs to be too expensive to not to be counted as davar sheyesh lo matirim. But on that further along the way, a very important commentary here is the Taz on Siman Chet. I saw that in the show sheet I sent it. It was sent out as Ot Kaf for some reason, but it's Ot Chet. They're during the whole last hour as the discussions about davar sheyesh lo matirin were going on here in class, I was smiling because this Taz, in my opinion, actually answers those questions conceptually in a broader sense, but specifically from the questions he has on our seif, he answers broader questions, in my opinion, about davar sheyesh lo matirin and why do we think certain things about davar sheyesh lo matirin. So, Sarah, can you please read the Taz in Ot Chet?
Sure. Kli shenasar v'chulei. Kaimalan, lama tzarich harashba
Kashali.
Oh, kashali, sorry. Yeah, that makes much more sense. Kashali lama tzarich harashba le'tamzeh, de tzarich hota'at shezachar harama achar kach. Ha'ein hana'asar shehu hakli yachol לאסור תפי מן האוסר. ואפילו האוסר שהוא הבלוע בו, לא יהיה עליו דין דבר שיש לו מתירין. דהה האיסור ההוא אין לו מתירין. Okay, so should I stop there?
Yeah, explain.
Okay, but ve'im ken lo yeh ne'asar. Maybe let's stop there.
Chamir min
Okay.
ha'oiser.
Yeah. Okay. So basically, the question he's got the following question: why does the Rashba need to bring this thing that basically is also brought by the Rama, that it's a question of that you might need to like go through the production of doing Hagala on the dishes, because actually it's not really Devar SheYesh lo Matirin at all, because the Isur that is Bolea in the pots is never going to become Mutar. It just might go away if you do Hagala, like it will disappear completely. But the Isur is not Devar SheYesh lo Matirin at all, because it just is Asur legamre forever.
Yeah. But the more specific point that he makes is lo ya oiser chamur min ha'ne'asar, that we can't create.
We shouldn't make it. It shouldn't be that the pot is held to a higher standard than the thing that was oser, the pot.
And like, notice the language. The language here is lo ya oiser chamur min ha'ne'asar, that we are thinking on how are we going to make this pot osur or mutar, and that's a very important point continuing forward, because the Taz very clearly thinks that a whole question of the Devar SheYesh lo Matirin is completely the Rabbanon, and it's completely a question of how Chachamim thought about what are the bonuses are we going to get from actually implying Isur on Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. So please continue.
Okay, v'sarazo matzino harbe pa'amim b'tosfot li'inan melech habole amidam mivio hatur sof siman kuvhei. Okay, so basically, he's just also going to tell you that this kind of logic also appears in the Tosfot when we're talking about salt that's got blood in it. Okay, v'yesh lomar. So now we're going to answer the question. De kivan sheyesh lo matirin ein lanu lashkiach b'shum svara lekula de ein lanu lismoch al shum kula kivan she bilav hachi yesh lo matirin. So he says it, if it were. Well, let me keep reading for 1 second.
That's it.
Should I stop there? Okay.
No.
So, Yavni, we're in the Taz in
Taz in Otchet in
halfway through.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thanks.
Yesh lomar.
So, Yesh lomar, de kevan sheyesh lo matirin ein lanu lashkiach b'shum svara lekula de ein lanu lismoch al shum kula kevan she bilav hachi yesh lo matirin. So I think that what he's saying here is we don't need a kula to say that this is okay, basically, because it is. I don't totally understand actually this logic, but I think what he's trying to say is that there is a way. Well, never mind. Actually, that doesn't explain. I don't know. I don't understand how this actually answers the kasha. So maybe somebody else can explain it better.
So, any other comments on the Taz, Aron?
I think this is all within the Hava Mina of why you would think that this was Devar SheYesh lo Matirin is back to what Lexi said previously, is it's not like an automatic thing, but there is a way to get rid of it, so we won't have a kula to allow you to get rid of it, given that there's already a way for getting rid of the it being aser, changing its status.
Yeah, but take it further a bit. The Taz point is taking it one step further. The Taz is basically saying that because Yesh lo Matirin, the whole logic of it is that we won't use any type of kula. It's not only that we don't use normal kulot, how kulot of safek or sfeika work. We actually see it as something, because it will have eter in the end by itself. We don't actually look. He says, like, we don't, even if like the kula The kula reason actually like shouts at our faces. We don't actually look at it. Lo mashgichinan ba. And again, it might be simplistic and like he basically like states the point from it within itself because it's davar sheyesh lo matirin lo nashgiach bekula le'atir. But like he actually makes very well the point of how the logic of davar sheyesh lo matirin actually works. That we here are looking at a situation that really in any normal isu we wouldn't even ask about it. How can it be that in an isu de rabbonon and in a fake isu de rabbonon we go that further to even ask the question? For the Taz, the big question here is not how is it muto. What was the avamina from milekatchila to ask if it's elsur? What was the avamina to say it's also? Because the kulos here are so obvious, and for him, this stretches the point of what actually davar sheyesh lo matirin means for chachamim. We're actually trying to make it osur. We're trying our best to make it osur. Was this point?
But no, but in the end, that's not true. That's the havamina. Now, the havamina is that I would never allow any type of heter because why should I? I have another alternative. Just wait an hour, wait a day. But but Kamash Malan, no. He's no. Am I wrong? Kamash Malan. He's saying that's just the havamina of why we asked the question, and then he said no, but that's not a good answer, and that's why we have to go to Hotzaot.
No, that's his answer all through the way. That he basically says that the question is the question because davar sheyesh lo matirin. The din of Hotzaot works in a different realm. It attacks the issue. It solves it from a different perspective. The question begins because davar sheyesh lo matirin. We don't makel on it. Like our instinct is not to be makel on it. That's his for. And actually, when we look in the Rashi. And the Rambam that Joel sent out and the Aron we read in Aron's shir, I think it becomes even clearer. Like this svara of not looking for an heter. I brought it here. Just a second. I'm going to share screen. Where is this? Yeah, opa. Can I share screen?
You should be able to.
Opa. Yes. Let me see. No,
but I still think that the Taz is saying his question was on the Rashba. Why did he give this reason that that you have to spend money to do Hagala? And his answer is because I might have thought. No.
Yeah, I thought that the answer is I might have thought that it is davar sheyesh lo matirin from the perspective of there is a way to make this mutter.
Right.
But that's exactly the point.
I don't really understand why that answers his kasha. That's why I was confused before, right? In other words, the way he explains the kasha is, well, why do we need this logic of the Rashba about the Hotzaot? Because actually there's no davar sheyesh lo matirin. There's just isser that goes away.
No, because he's saying like this.
Question.
Wait, I have the answer for you, Sarah. This is what it's saying. The Taz is saying, I would have known that it's not a davar sheyesh lo matirin because it's not in the rubric of davar sheyesh lo matirin. It's something else. It's the pot is becoming usher because of some other thing. It's always usher. And the answer is no, it is the davar sheyesh lo matirin because it's in the general category of things that would eventually become mutter, and it's a very broad category, and it also includes this. And therefore, we need to come up with a reason why we don't say it, and that's why we say it's because of the extra expenses.
Exactly, but in that
I take it back. You're right.
We
Rafael's
broaden
right. There is a broader category of anything that could one day become mutter. I'm just not going to rely on any kind of bittul or any kind of dinim that might exist.
And that's exactly, and the essential svara is the svara of davar sheyesh lo matirin. Like the Taz actually like plays with the language of davar sheyesh lo matirin. Why should we look for a hater? Like it is embedded in the logic of it. And when we read Rashi, afilu be'elef abatil, I'll read myself just this, like to get it faster. אף על גב דמדאורייתא חד בתרי בטיל. Yes, the Rashi in Masechet Beitzah daf gimel amud bet dichtiv אחרי רבים להטות אחמור רבונון hoil ויש לו מתירים. Because it has matirim, we have the chumrah. Like it is like the two sides of the same coin. Like the tzad kula is what creates the logic of actually searching for a chumrah, because we don't want people to mezalzel on it. Lo yochalenu beisur, because now it's still asur. And like the whole discussion that we had in the last year about, is it actually asur if I bataled it? Yes, because when Chachamim look on it, they bestowed it on a special isur, and the Rambam will actually like medame to kochim, yeah. The isur still exists. We bestow in it a special level of isur, of isurness. I don't know. And again, the Rambam וכן כל דבר שיש לו מתירים, אפילו היה אסור מדבריהם, כגון איסור מוקצה ביום ונולד ביום טוב, לא נתנו בו שחמש שיעור, אלא אפילו אחד בכמה אלפים אינו בטל, שהרי יש לו בו דרך שיותר בה, כגון הקדוש מעשר שני, וכיוצא בהם. And again, it might be an overstated point, but I find that like it does like clear up a bit about like the whole logic behind it. It makes it more it better articulates it.
Right. Can I give us a quick example? Another example that we're going to talk about later is bread that's cooked in an oven with that has a flavor of meat. So the bread now has cooked with meat in the oven, so now it has a smell of meat. And we would discuss whether smell is significant, but whatever there's Rashi or some Rishonim come along and say, well, why bother eating it with cheese? Don't eat it with cheese. Just eat it with a meat meal. Don't eat the bread, even though maybe it's not batel. I'm sorry, maybe the smell is insignificant, but still be machmir and only eat it with a fleshik meal. In other words, any type of thing that is more mutter, just do that as opposed to relying on bittul or any other dinim like rechalo milta.
Exactly. Rolandis, you had something to say?
No, go, flow. Let's move now. No. Let's. I think let's give Rafael some chance here.
Anyone? Sure. No questions, no comments. Okay, so continuing on, still in the beginning of this seif, there's a very interesting ha'ara that basically pops out from basically all the noise kelim that are in the Taz about Da'at HaMa'aril. Where is this? Ma'aril. It's brought in the Shach. Just a second, I noticed this to myself. Yes, Shach Otchet. If anyone finds Katav Ma'aril, it's Ma'aril B'tshuva. If when you guys find it, raise your hand. Everyone found it? Okay, Aron, would you mind reading it?
B'Ma'aril b'tshuva Siman kasad cholek gam ken harashba da hotza lahagit lo hefsed mu'atu u kedechashvenan b'perek hazahav b'perek zayin d'nadarim ma'aser sheni yesh lo matirin al yedei ha'ala l'Yerushalayim. Okay, so the Ma'aril is cholek on the Rash. When he says having to do a hotzah for Hagala is not a very big hefsed, especially given that we say Maser Sheni is Yesh Lo Matirin, because you can take it up to Yerushalayim, which would presumably be a much bigger effort. וגם נראה לי לשהות הכלים עד שלא יהיו בני יומן ואז שערי מן התורה. וכן כתב בסוף תשובות משנה ברורה. אלא כתב שם דהיינו דווקא להשתמש בהן בכולם יחד. אבל באמת בפני עצמו לא. מכיוון דלא כאלה טעמה לא הווה דבר שיש למתירין. Okay, and we should have a chashash and note that what the Maharil says in a case where there's not a big monetary loss at stake. I also think you should let the vessels, either Maharil, either Shach, you should let the vessels rest until they're not Bnei Yoman, and then it's permitted to use a Minotaur in any event, so you have an extra safeguard.
Tzad Kula. So there are some interesting questions about this Shach. First of all, about it goes back to the Maharil himself. Like the Maharil's brought, as I said, but basically all the Noisei Kelim, the Bahari Toyev, the Gro, the Kreti Upleti, the Pitrei Tshuva. And it's quite suspicious that the Rama doesn't like think about actually telling us that this Maharil exists. Like it wants it to be erased in some way. But the first point, the first point is in the Maharil itself. The kasha of the Maharil on the Rashba is basically it hinges a bit on the question of what is Utzah. As we said, like the lashon, especially in Siman Seif Bet here in the Shulchan Aruch, and in Siman Kuf Kuf Bet in the two, as we will see, it has some kind of a hyperbole, some level of a hyperbole at least, of actually saying about lefazer ma'otav. It sounds like it needs to be a great, or that part of the factor to make it not davar sheyesh lamatirim. It's not a normal hotza'ah. That's something that you can get from reading, I don't know, superficially the language of the Shulchan Aruch here and the Tur in Kuf Kuf Bet, and that raises the question of the Maharil. It's Hagala isn't big enough. How much does it cost? I don't know. An hour of work that you're not going to they're not going to continue in your normal labor, and you're going to do only a galas kalim, or I don't know, paying someone or paying the water, like the price of the water. It doesn't sound something so pricey. And he has also the kasha from the kasha of Aliyah Regel that we have from Meiser Sheni. That as Aron giggled, it actually is funny because one of the lashonot used by the Rishonim about this din of Otza'ah, Rabbeinu Tam uses the language of Torah. So, like, I don't know, doing a gola might be some, I don't know, Torah, how would you translate it to English? It's a level of
Toil.
Yeah, toil. But is there any more toil to actually go to Jerusalem? Doing a galas kalim is Torah, but going to Jerusalem isn't Torah. And there is this like a very interesting, I don't know, metach. There is a tension between the language used by the Shulchan Aruch, the language used by the Rishonim, and the kashas that it brings up. But one of the things that I wanted to point out, as I said in the beginning, is that I think that the language of the tool that quotes more precisely the Rashba might have a solution to this question from within itself, and it's a good lesson on how to paskin as a whole. But I'll read again how the Shulchan Aruch phrases it, and then we'll see how the tool in Kuf Kaf Bet brings from the Rashba, and I think the difference will strike. כלי שנאסר בבלי איסור, שנתערב באחרים ואינו ניכר, בטל, ואין דנין אותו כדבר שיש לו מתירים, parenthesis, meaning רמה, לפי שצריך להוציא עליו הוצאות להגילו, וכל כיוצא בזיו. Continuing from here directly into Divrei Tur, I'll share screen here. Telling me if you guys can see it.
Yeah.
Ilana, can you read, please?
Yeah, read the tour.
Yeah.
כתב הרשב"א, כלי שנאסר בבליעת איסור ונתערב באחרים ואינו ניכר, בטל ברוב. ואף על פי שאפשר להגילו ולהחזירו להכשירו על ידי כך, אין דנין אותו כדבר שיש לו מתירין לאסור כולם עד שיגילם, אלא הרי הוא כאיסור יבש שנתערב ביבש ובטל ברוב, שכל שאין מתירין שלו באים מאליהן, וצריך לפזר מעותיו ולהוציא הוצאות במתירין, אינו בכלל שיש לו מתירין. Should I translate, explain?
Yeah, to explain, broadly explain,
Okay.
because he basically says a lot from what we already saw in the Shulchan Aruch, but
If the kli that absorbed the isur and mixed up with other kelim, it's batel barov. We don't consider it davar shleish lo matirin, such that it wouldn't have bitul. Even though you could, in a way, it is like a davar shleish lo matirin in the sense that you could do hagala and therefore make it, get rid of the isur. We don't consider it davar shleish lo matirin. But rather we don't consider it davar shleish lo matirin, and because it would require too much money, you would have to lefazer motav in order to make it mutar.
yeah. So you ate the bait of the Rema. Mazel tov, we all ate the same bait of the Rema, because, and I say the bait because it's very intuitive for us to actually read the basic framework that the Shulchan Aruch, the quoting of the Shulchan Aruch, that the centerpiece of this din here is Otzaot. But when we read the actual what the Torah actually says, there is a point that is simply omitted from the Shulchan Aruch in our seif. There is a she'ein matirin shelo ba'in me'eleihen, that the heter doesn't come from itself. And it's funny because that's the basic category of the davar sheyesh lo matirin. But yeah, the beita shenolda b'yom tov. But it is quite clear. It can be overstressed here, but that the Rashba himself doesn't see here let's say a simplistic halachic principle on how do we actually see kalim in regards for davar shelo matirin. It seems like as Rav Nachum says quite sometimes in the shiurim, let's say a chazel etz terufei tshuva. We have here a case of kalim shenit arvu ve'enam mekir. We have here multiple sides, tzedadim lekula, that are added up to actually create the heter. When we read the paraphrase in the Shulchan Aruch, it seems as something I would say quite monolithic, quite simplistic. But when we read the Rashba carefully, and when we read the Tur that actually preserves the Rashba in a better way, we see here that it has quite a lot of moving parts. We have here, first of all, there needs to be some otza'ah, and there needs also to be and the heter doesn't come from itself. There is another tzad kula that I'll stress in a bit, but from that point we can already answer pretty much the question of the Ma'aril in a very simple way. What was the question of the Ma'aril? The otza'ah isn't big enough, so even without entering the head of what is a big enough otza'ah that would cause something to be not davar sheyesh lo matirim. When I read simply the Rashba that way, I can say, okay, maybe the otza'ah isn't enough, but I have another side here. They have the side that the heter doesn't come from itself, meaning there are two tzedadim lekula. It's not only one tzad lekula. Was I clear?
But there are something I think the Shach himself might bring this up somewhere, but something that a couple people raise the kashya on the heter me'etzmo or me'elehen, right, is that we have one of the cases that's given is nidarim, right? That nidarim are considered davar sheyesh lo matirin, and that's not something that it's going to automatically be undone. And so you have to like go and ask a hacham to undo your neder. And I know like they find ways to distinguish that and say that's different, but like it does pose a bit of a challenge to the idea of like it's something that just needs to like naturally unfold.
Of course, the kasha stands on its place, but I think that like simply stating the basic category of davar sheyesh lo matirim is the davar shenitam elav. Is the so like what the Rashba is basically saying is that we can't say that this pot is a simplistic davar sheyesh lo matirim, that I would impose on it this category, even though it doesn't clearly fit it. And it's again, it might be a tzad kula chalash, but it's a tzad kula. As I said, when I wrote it to myself, it's a compository kula. It's a kula that comes from multiple sides, and it makes it, in my opinion, it makes it a bit more clear. It's not a simple thing. It's not only the yotzah.
I don't really understand why it's like a separate tzad kula. They seem to be related. They're not independent things. Like that's just the extreme case of it's so inexpensive that it just happens by itself. That's like one pole. No.
Yes and no. They do come independent in the Rishonim, meaning you have the tzad kula of davar sheyesh lo matirim that comes from itself, and the tzad kula that it doesn't. It needs to be worked on. And they're opposites, and they exist simultaneously. I'll try to move forward because another thing interesting to think, if we're already pondering on this compository option on reading the Rashba, is that maybe the heker part, it's classical to read, and most mefarshim on Shulchan Aruch read v'nitarev b'acherim ve'eino nikar, as part of the question of why isn't it actually batel? Yeah, how can if I don't know if the pot was if I could actually recognize the pot, it would actually have a problem here of minkera of isur nikar, and it wouldn't be batel. But if we think of, again in this more compository way, maybe it's also one of the tzadei kula here. Ave'eno nikar here plays a role inside the question, why isn't it davar sheyesh lo matirim? It's another tzad lekula inside the broader context of davar sheyesh lo matirim. But this was only a side note. Continuing, the kashi of the Ma'aril comes from Din Meiser Sheni, and actually, like thinking about it, it might open up an interesting way of thinking on what actually means Torah. Because again, reminding the Kashya, do you say that, I don't know, Torah or Otza'ah to go to do a Galas Kelim is bigger than actually going to Jerusalem to eat your Meiser Sheni? It doesn't work out. It means that Torah or Otza'ah aren't clear minimalistic categories to actually cancel out davar sheyesh lo matirim. But we actually see in our sources that there is a simple or maybe a like presupposed view that a Jew will go to the temple, and maybe that is the logic behind the Rashba on this kula, is that why actually Meiser Sheni is davar sheyesh lo matirim? Because a Jew will eventually, during a year, go to the temple. He needs to do it. That's also the logic of the Torah.
You're saying it's not Torah because it's a normal occurrence.
Yeah, it will simply happen in Elul.
That Torah is something which it's added on. That's a tircha. A tircha is an added on thing that even in terms of itself, it might be a klanakite. It might be a very small thing. So klanakite is a small thing. But since it's added on, it's not the normal thing. A Jew goes to the temple.
Yeah.
But a Jew doesn't necessarily have to do all these other things.
Yeah.
All right.
There's no problem of actually having a non-kosher keli on my house. But I need to go to Jerusalem, and like my Meiser Sheni goes along with me. Like I'm going by myself, and the Meiser Sheni simply comes with me. And we see this logic. I won't read it from inside, but in Gemara in Rosh Hashanah, when it posits the question of the love of Bal Te'acher, when you have the issue of actually being late on giving your sacrifices, your promised sacrifices, what is actually being late? So Kevan She'ovar Alav Sholosh Regolim, because you went to Jerusalem 3 times, at least one time. I don't know, maybe not in all the feasts. Every single Jew goes. Women go only in one of the feasts. So after Sholosh Regolim, you can actually say, okay, you're late. You had at least one opportunity to go to the temple and do your sacrifice, and you didn't do it. So it's like basically the logic here is that Me'elav isn't, or Torah maybe isn't a category of what I'm doing, is what am I supposed to do? What would happen even without, I don't know, any special agency? And the final era I had on the Taz and on the Shach, and I am spending quite a lot of time in this Shach because it's a very important Shach, is his pitaron on actually waiting for the Keli. And I think I thought to actually wait, like give some thought on it, because it is a solution that is given in Yisuf Vetel quite sometimes, and it has one source in the Bavli of actually doing it, and the source is quite dubious. So I sent you guys to read the Bavli in Avodah Zorah Daf Ein Hey Amud Bet, and also Ein Aleph, Ein Vav Amud Aleph. And as I study Talmudics, I brought here some Shinui Girsa, because it is quite interesting on how the concept of thinking about Tam Nifgam, or how Isur cancel themselves out, as Aron and Rav Landi said in the last hour. How did it create itself in halachic mind, in halachic thinking? So Yavni, can you maybe read the Girsat Tfusim?
Sure. ולמען דאמר נותן טעם לפגם מותר, גאולי עובדי כוכבים דאסר רחמנה, היכי משכחת לה, אמר רב חייא ברי דרב הונא, לא אסרה תורה, אלא קדרה בת יומא, דלאו נותן טעם לפגם הוא. מכאן ואילך לישתרי גזרה קדרה שאינה בת יומא, משום, גזירה, קדרה שאינה בת יומא משום קדרה בת יומא, ואידך קדרה בת יומא נמי מפגם פגמה. So yeah, should I? So those who say that that if it gives a bad flavor, then it's mutar. This is based on the bad things of the Kochavim that
so only to like make it easier, the sugya here is about Tvilas Kelim, and we're pondering on how can actually be Tvilat Kelim deoraisa or Agalas Kelim deoraisa. I bought a kli from a goy. When is Agala actually deoraita?
Right. And because like, why would you have to do it if it is noten tam lifgam after a day, which we assume it is, and then so that's when it would be deoraita, and after that it's permitted without hagala or tvila, but there's a gzerat chachamim that you do it anyway, so that you don't come to have it when it's within a day.
The last phrase is a bit complicated, the Aramaic here, and it's not exactly our subject, but it's simply the second Deah. The Gemara treats the second opinion, because there is an opinion that Tam Livgam Mutar, and Tam Livgam Asur. Idach, it means according to the other opinion. Well, to make it simple, because the time is running, the interesting point that the Gemara makes is that actually Liman Damal Tam Nifgam Mutar, and it's quite complicated how this view gets codified into halacha. But Liman Damal Tam Nifgam Mutar, Tvilas Kelim only exists deoraita for one day, or Agalas Kelim only exists deoraita for one day. The rest of the days is
Derabanan.
I don't. They exist midrabanan, as we see here in the orange section. The coloring here, because we're not going to read the whole differences of Gilsot, we see that for some reason this orange bit that actually enters inside the logic of what will happen if I wait a day isn't original to the Gemara, isn't Amoraic, at least in its sources. It's probably most scholars ponder that it is a Geonic or Sevoraic editorial comment that simply entered inside the Gemara. It was like some Talmud wrote it on the side of his Gemara, and it entered inside the text. We can see it, for example. I won't enter how we do a textual criticism, but basically, when we see an he'ara that is put in some kitvei yad in the beginning and some kitvei yad in the end, it means it's not natural to the text. And we actually have the girsa from the Gniza that doesn't bring it at all. The Gniza's girsa simply ends the treatment of the Deah that speaks about Tam Livgam Asur, Tam Livgam Mutar, on actually saying that, there's only Tvilat Kelim or Agalat Kelim for one day. And it doesn't ponder on the option, what would actually happen if I waited a day? Of course, someone can do with the finger and say, the Gemara thinks that if you wait, it will also be midrabanan. But the Gemara doesn't say it in this normal, in this normative, in this more primordial strata of thought. And the point I wanted to stress here is a point about Devar Shel Mativa, but also a point about how we think about Isu Ve'eta here, that this thought of actually waiting doesn't solve that much. Because especially if we go back to the Taz of we're looking to be machmir here, especially with the thought that actually Devar Sheyesh Lo Matirin will be muta tomorrow. It has like this time aspect actually embedded in it. What do we actually gain? Like Chachamim didn't think waiting could be a good option here. You could call it mevatel yisur lekatchila. Like the classical.
Doesn't the older version of the Girsami Agniza like make it more valuable to wait?
No, because it simply said it simply doesn't even ponder that waiting could be matirit. The question mikan va'elach lishteri is a question that says, "Oh, let's wait." That meaning, I would say someone like the Shach could write this question, but this question didn't actually, like the Gemara didn't even think about this question. Do you understand what I mean?
On the other hand, it also didn't answer it. It didn't say that we don't have the gzera, we don't have the derabanan that it's still asur, so it could be just mutar legamri, no?
But that's part of the point. Of course you can say that it could be mutar legamri, but then the Gemara would read quite weird, meaning there is only tvilat kelim and agalat kelim for one day, and then there's nothing. I think the more
that's exactly how to read the Gemara. I don't see what's the problem. That's exactly the gears of the Geniza, and that makes sense. That Tvila, that Hagala is for Bat Yoma.
Yeah, but the Geniza also, I think that the Geniza, for the Geniza's Girsa, the basic thought about Agalas Kelim isn't only in the Deoraisa, meaning what our Girsa has is thinking, there is this basic level of Agala and it's Deoraisa. Because it's mutar after one day, Chachamim made another Gzeira. But when we think about Ilchot about Isu Ve'eta, we don't only think about the Deoraita strata. We think about multiple things together. What I think the Gniza here gives us to our discussion is that I'm not quite sure that waiting would solve all the problems by waiting. Meaning, it will maybe not be Asur D'Oraisa, but some Isur D'Rabbanan would still stay here. It's a presupposed Isur D'Rabbanan that stays on the Keli. it's simply because Isur is inside it. I don't know, as was stated in last year, we are actually eating something of the essence of the Isur is there, even though there is Tam Lipgam, or maybe something like that. And we don't need to reach another Gzeira to actually say it's also Midrabona, because we don't even think about waiting as a solution. It's Mevatel Isur Lekatchila. We're not. It's not the intuitive solution that the Gemara in its original level goes to. And I understand how it can be understood another way. That's the point I saw here. I see we don't have quite a lot of time. I would only want to make another point about the next seif. I'll ask who can read, maybe. Jacob, the cycle went back to you. Can you maybe read Seif Daled in the Haggah?
Devar SheYesh lo Matirin eno batel. Hayu dafka im ha'isur ba'ayin o SheYesh adayin mam asut ha'isur bataro that aval ta'amo batel. L'chein im isur machmat atzmo batel. So this is something that Devar SheYesh lo Matirin eno batel. That's precisely if you can clearly see the Isser, or there's still some of the substance of the mamish ikar Isser in the mixture, but the flavor can be batel. And if it's not Isser, in and of itself, it can be batel. ולכן חתיכה שלא נמלכה תוך 3 ימים, אף על פי שיש אומרים במקרה דבר שיש לו מתירין, הואל ומותרת לצלי אפילו הכי בטלה, דאין איסור על מחמת דם הבלוע בה. So, and therefore, a piece of meat that wasn't salted for 3 days, even though there are those that would say it's Devar SheYesh lo Matirin, since it's permitted to roast, even this can be batel, since it's only Isser because of the blood that's absorbed within it.
Yeah.
Well,
that's the main part. I wanted only to read the Torah Chatat here. The Ramaz Chibur on Isur ve'eter. He brings here a very interesting opinion of the Ran, that it's quite controversial if that's what the Ran actually thought, but the Ran as brought in Torah Chatat says as so. It's important enough that the Rama found it important to actually address it. So Sarah, can you read maybe the Ran, the Torah Chatat?
Sure. Katav Aron בפרק הנשה דף such and such דבר שיש לו מתירין שנפל ברוטב אסר אותו רוטב ונפל ממנו לרוטב אחרת אוסרת באלף עד כאן לשונו. Okay, so there's a דבר שיש לו מתירין that fell into some sort of sauce, and then that is users the whole sauce, and then some of that falls into another thing, that also is a sewer, up to, even if there's like a 1 to 1,000 ratio. Okay. לפי מה שנתבאר לעיל, דתם דבר שיש לו מתירין בטל, ואינו אוסר רק ממשו של איסור. Right. והוא הדין רוטב זו נמי בטלה. So, Tam Devar, the taste left over of Devar SheYesh lo Matirin, it should be batel, even if the thing itself isn't. Okay. ועוד, דלפי דבריו, איסור שאינו מחמת עצמו, רק שבעל מחמת איסור אחר, שייך בדבר שיש לו מתירין. ואין כן דעת המהרי בתורת הבית.
בתרומת הדשן.
תרומת הדשן, okay, thank you. ונראה יש לסמוך עד דברי המהרים, מאחר שדאיסור דרבנן הוא ואינו בטל.
Continue, like the last phrase. על דרך.
על דרך סברה זו, אמרינן בחתיכה הראויה להתכבד.
So explain.
Okay, great. So we have this initial position of the run, maybe, and then he says, according to this, an isur that is not from, it's not Mahmat Atzmo, but rather is just from some other isur that's sort of stuck in with it. Given what he said, it seems like Devar SheYesh lo Matirin would apply to that case, which is different than what we saw in some other sources we looked at today, and that's also different than what's in the Trumat HaDeshen. And then he thinks we should follow the Trumat HaDeshen.
Oh, great, great summary. But the point, the interesting point about this Ran, again, it's so weird. He's Yechida, and maybe he doesn't even exist. Maybe the Ran doesn't even think that. But like, what actually the Rema I think uses the Ran here to actually like drive this point home is the point that we actually do think about Devar Shel Matirim in the same svarot as we do. Actually, the language that Jacob read in Seif Dalet is actually very similar to the languages we use about the Chaticha Realit Kabed, as we read last week. Like, there is this question about Chaticha Realit Kabed, the Bala blood, the swallowed blood. We think about the blood as in itself. And again, that may be the simple svara, and that's the svara of most Rishonim. But when we contrast this with the Ran, this weird Ran, we actually stresses the point better. Because the Ran Tachlis, as we saw, for example, from the Taz and from the Rambam, from their very rigorous language about Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim, we could reach that point. It's not implausible to say as the Ran that because if Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim lo batel afilu be'elef, Oto Devar shebala isur Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim could actually become it, because I don't know, if a drop of blood doesn't cancel out be'elef, why does the meat that swallowed it would be batel? It is merely a continuation of the Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim. The essence of the Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim continues on. And the interesting thing is that, like, the logic of the Rema uses to cancel out, to batel the Ran's Deah on Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim she'eino batel, is a logic that, again, does not come from this precise world of thought of Devar Sheyesh lo Matirim, that, again, as we saw from the beginning of our learning today, is a very Chumrah intended worldview of Psika. It does, like, brings it back into the fold in a very interesting way, and it goes back to all the halachot that we didn't cover today. Any questions or comments on that?
But isn't him saying that it's can you pull it back up for 1 second? Sorry.
Yeah, sure.
I can't.
A second,
I didn't memorize it yet, but
yeah.
Okay, right. So when he says
what is the case? What's the
when
case?
when he quotes it, he says the thing about Mahmat Atzmo. That is precisely a criterion of Devar SheYesh lo Matirin. And he's saying, like, obviously this thing that the Ran says must be crazy because it doesn't follow the rules that we've set out for Devar SheYesh lo Matirin, i.e. that one of the criteria seems to be that it has to be, the Isur has to be from itself and not from some other thing.
Yeah,
well, no, but what all of the other people end up saying is that, like, that's probably not necessary for Devar SheYesh lo Matirim, which I think it's at, like, the various ways that we've been distinguishing it from example like these other like not attainable categories, because here they're like, yeah, it makes sense for the kabed like concept that it's about, is this isser significant enough? Am I benefiting from the presence of this isser? Whereas so like a thing that's balua from a little bit of isser, that's like actually a different reality than like a full nevela steak. Whereas here it's like the whole concept is just, is there a way that this could be consumed permissively? Yes. And so like whether or not it's because of mechamat atzmo or something else in it, that's kind of like less core to the very concept of Devar SheYesh Matirin and how it functions.
Yeah, exactly. So as answering Reb Nachum's question and following Lexi's point, I think that the Metzius doesn't actually matter so much here. The Metziut here is actually a crazy Metziut of actually, we're thinking about the Devar SheYesh Matirin as something, I don't know, contagious. It's we have only a very small essence of it, but it still counts. That's the Aron, as at least I brought in the Rema, that we're thinking about דבר שיש לו מתירים, לא בטל אפילו באלף ממש. I cook דבר שיש לו מתירים in a sauce, and some taste of it goes away. And if I take some of that sauce, it's already, and put it in a bigger pot of sauce, it also becomes דבר שיש לו מתירים. And again, as answering Sarah's question, I think that I think that in the end, the Rama does say that that's the svara we use about Chaticha Kabeda, but there's no place in the Gemara that this logic is like, I don't know, put out so clearly. We simply are importing this logic here. And again, I could say from a more following the Gemara, I could actually reach quite clearly reach the Ran's Deah, this weird Deah that it's not bate because I can't consume it in a heter way. Like again, as I said, it's bringing it back into the fold. Okay, it is a weird and machmir category, but we do in the end think of it in categories of chaticha that resemble those of chaticha u'yaled kaved.
Rafael, do you have to finish up?
Yeah,
no,
I wanted questions,
statement?
maybe comments, questions, or anything.
No, all this just, in reaction, leads me to feel that the logic of Devar SheYesh Lo Matirin means Yesh Lo Matirin, therefore it's usher now. I'm just talking sub-pashut. It's usher now, and it's binary. Terrible word. It's binary. You have Iser, then you have Eter. What can I say? And that primacy of it defines it. And the definite just as there's going to be a complete Eter, that means there's a complete Iser up until now. And we don't care what other tricks you want to play. And it's not even a social definition about Hefset, even though that will come in, of course, but primarily we don't care about social definitions. We don't care about the impact. The fact that it's Devar SheYesh Lo Matirin means it's usher up until now, and that magical transformation, it's not so magical, this logical transformation will take when the logic comes, and don't bother me about it until then. Anyway, that's what hits me at the end. I don't mean that to be the last comment. Well, actually, I do mean it to be the last comment, but I don't. But it's not really right.
Well, thank you, Rafael.
What do you got, Nachum?
Thank you, Rafael. Thank you, Aron. It was very interesting to hear. I'm glad that Rafael mentioned Noten Tam Gam, because that's our next sugya, and I'll send out some sources for that. Yisher to everybody. Keep learning.
Amen.
Okay.
Amen.